Thank you, and I want to introduce our featured speaker for tonight, Dr. Steve Wiegenstein. We had a great article in the Sedalia Democrat today about Steve and about Spofest. Dr. Wiegenstein was born and raised in the eastern Missouri Ozarks, and he attended college at the University of Missouri. After a few years as a news reporter, he returned to school and got into higher education, with teaching stints at Centenary College, I hope I said that right, of Louisiana, Drury College, now University, Culver Stockton College, and Western Kentucky University. He is currently the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at Columbia College in Columbia, Missouri. Steve will be reading tonight from his new book, Slant of Light. I think it was published in April of this year. And Margot D. Dill, a fellow writer, editor, and speaker teacher, gave a review of his book. It was published in the Champaign News Gazette, Champaign, Illinois. Dill said, "Steve Wiegenstein is a debut novelist with a brand new independent publisher. But his historical fiction novel, Slant of Light, is so well written, immediately transforming readers to Missouri in the late 1850s, that they'll think he's been writing and publishing books for decades. His descriptions are perfect, his dialogue realistic, and his plot captivating." Please welcome Dr. Steve Wiegenstein.
Well, thank you for this wonderful, warm greeting. Is this okay at the height of the tent? Okay. Good. My name is Steve Wiegenstein, and I live in Columbia, and I do have this nice historical novel that got published in April after an almost endless struggle of finding an agent and not finding an agent, and finding a publisher and working with the publisher. And I will just say that it is for sale. This book is available right back there at the table where I've been sitting for $14.95 plus tax, and we take cash, checks, and credit cards. So if anyone feels inspired, by all means. And if you buy it tonight, you get it autographed as well. This is a book that comes out of my past, my childhood, growing up in the Ozarks. That's where the novel is set. And it also comes out of my academic interests, one of which is utopian communities of the 19th century. And it's one of the most fascinating aspects of history in America is that back in the 1820s, 30s, and 40s, there were all kinds of settlements out through the Midwest, in fact, where people would simply pick up. They would decide they had a great idea for how everybody should organize their lives, and they would start a colony in Missouri, in Illinois, in Iowa, in Tennessee, all over the place, and many of these folks were unabashed communists. So we don't think about the Midwest as being a haven for communism, but it certainly was in that era. And so I had the idea, well, let's take one of these social reformers who's got a grand idea and set him down in the countryside where I know best and see what happens. So that's the essential premise of Slant of Light, which is the title of the book. It's called, the subtitle is A Novel of Utopian Dreams and Civil War. So what I'd like to do to start out with would be just to read you the opening passage, which kind of sets up the main, or one of the three main characters, who is the leader of the community, whose name is James Turner. I wanted to, as all you writers know, getting your opening right is about 3/4 of the battle. So I spent a long time working and reworking various different openings because I wanted to get an idea of something that embodied the optimism and yet at the same time the imminent danger that was going on in our country during that period. because after all, the book starts in 1857. And when you research that period, what's interesting, of course, is that everybody knew, and they had known for years, that something really terrible was about to happen in our country, but they didn't know what to do about it, and so they would get, dare I say, they would get mired down in partisan politics, and nothing would get done, except compromises or apparent compromises that only made things worse at the end. So it starts with our character, James, and I'll just go ahead and get started reading. And then after this, we'll go to the intermission, and hopefully we'll all be able to relax for a few minutes and into the second set. August 1857. The keelboat moved so slowly against the current that Turner sometimes wondered if they were moving at all. Keeping a steady rhythm, Pettibone and his son worked the poles on the quarter-sized boat that they had built to ply the smaller rivers that fed the Mississippi. Whenever the current picked up, Turner took the spare pole and tried to help. But although he was tall and muscular with a wide body that didn't narrow from shoulders to hips, poling a boat wasn't as simple as it looked. He pushed too soon, too late, missed the bottom, stuck the pole in the mud, all to the amusement of Pettibone's son, Charlie. And with every stroke, Turner asked himself, "What in all creation am I doing here?" "Lem," Pettibone called. They all ducked. Turner had unloaded his cargo at a steamboat landing in Arkansas and come the rest of the way on the keelboat, winding through the tangle of bayous where the rivers met, the countryside flat and swampy, the loops of the river indistinguishable. Pettibone claimed he knew the channel of the St. Francis, so there was nothing to do but trust him. Turner wondered now about the steamboat captain's advice to take a boat up the St. Francis instead of continuing to Cape Girardeau and traveling overland in whatever wagons he could rent or buy. Mosquitoes woke them before dawn and troubled them until the sun's heat drove them to the shade, then troubled them again as soon as the sun declined. To give more purchase to their poles, they hugged the bank, but that meant fighting through overhanging brush all day. In the center of the boat was a stumpy mast, a 4-inch pole draped with a canvas sail, fixed with a series of shaky-looking braces. Pettibone was constantly adjusting it, but most of the time it just hung slack in the hot, wet air. At night they tied up on the few solid-looking humps of land and slept on the boat for fear of snakes, netting draped over their bodies to slow down the mosquitoes. Even then, Turner could not sleep well, dreaming of fat water moccasins slithering onto the deck. On the 8th day, a long, low rise appeared before them. "That there's Crowley's Ridge," said Pettibone. "Last piece of Arkansas you'll see." "Thank God Almighty for that," Turner replied. The ridge sat to their left like a humped cloud bank on the horizon, but the countryside didn't change. Arkansas on the left, Missouri on the right, it was all the same. Charlie, a boy of 13, entertained himself by commenting aimlessly on everything he saw. Turtles, herons, the stream of his pee into the river, until his father growled for silence. The current strengthened as they rounded the ridge, but Turner had to wade ashore with a rope. At first he pulled directly on the boat, but Pettibone showed him how to snub the rope around a tree and keep it tight. "Just take up the slack," he said. "You don't need to haul us upriver yourself." Turner filed away this information as he planned to file away every piece of knowledge he gained for the next few years. He had to. This new chapter of his life depended on it. He was no farmer and had 30 years' worth of experience to catch up on. But surely a man could pick up the tricks with attentiveness and study. He didn't know what he had been born to become, but by God it was not a farmer. He'd seen them every day back in Illinois, clumping into the newspaper office on their trips into town to hear the gossip, to sit around the desk and spit, leaving the editor's boy, him, to clean up their misses. When he was small, he had disliked these men, their earthy smell, their beards, their ragged clothes. As he grew older, he saw that they were not dirty and ragged by choice, but by necessity. Their lives swallowed up by their 40 acres of ground, their debts, the prices handed to them by the local merchants and the railroad men. Of course they were ignorant of the larger world. Their world was no bigger than a quarter-mile square, and that if they were lucky. Even then, Turner knew he was not going to be a village editor like his father, listening with forced politeness to any son of a bitch with a nickel, bowing to the county judges for the privilege of printing their legal notices. And now, if his father were alive, how he would laugh to see him on a keelboat, hauling a pile of tools and seeds into Missouri. "Okay, jump on," Pettibone said. "We're crossing over." Ahead, the ridge finally came down to meet the river, ending in some low chalk bluffs. A ferry boat was tethered on the Missouri side, where a wagon track ended in a ramp with packed dirt. The ferryman, thin and toothless, walked out of his shed as they pulled by. He was shirtless but wore a battered hat. "Well, Pettibone," he called, "come in and sit. I got whiskey." Pettibone cast a sideways glance but did not stop pulling. "My customer here is in a hurry. I'll get you on the way back down." The ferryman touched the brim of his hat to Turner. "You're welcome inside too, mister." "No thanks, not even noon yet." "Where are you headed?" Pettibone interrupted. "Greenville, up by Greenville." They were almost out of talking range. "Save me some of that old tanglefoot for when I come back." "I will, I will," the ferryman called out and turned back to his cabin. They poled in silence until they rounded the next bend. "I tell you what," Pettibone said in a low voice, "that old bastard won't cut your throat for your goods, but he knows people who will." And that's the story as it opens. So let's enjoy our intermission for now.